So I was actually going to start my presentation talking about vulnerabilities, because I think that when we talk about evidence-based, evidence to make sense, I think really requires understanding the vulnerabilities at a granular level. When we look at what's happening in disasterscape, I think it's obvious that the weather-related or climate change-related disasters are growing. And it is related to climate change, related to urbanization, many other causes, but this is evident. So while this is really scary in a way, but it has some aspects that is relevant to our conversation today, which is that there is an element of predictability in weather-related, climate-related disasters. And that's what I will talk a little bit about today. Let me just go to the next slide. And this is, as you can see, weather-related, climate-related disasters are prevalent in Africa. Just in the last 30, 40 years, around 740,000 lives lost, and the cost of it is close to $40 billion. And mainly you see the drought, extreme temperatures, flood, and storms. So this is very relevant to Africa, as well as other continents, of course. But when we talk about vulnerabilities, again, Professor Leonard really laid it out. The vulnerabilities has many hidden elements, and some of them are not always obvious to us as a humanitarian organization. COVID-19 showed it to us very well, actually. So we really need to get better at understanding the specific vulnerabilities, especially in urban settings. And this has many aspects: personal aspects, community aspects, and also systemic aspects, understanding the systemic vulnerabilities, systemic failures that contributes to vulnerabilities to disasters and climate change as well. So I will, since I have only 7 minutes, I'm just going to jump to what does it mean? What we learned as Red Cross, Red Crescent movement from the ground, what we learned, what works for effective disaster and climate, addressing disaster and climate risks. So first thing is participation, accountability, and accessibility at all levels, not just the disaster management continuum, but I'm also talking about at all levels of the society, individual, household, community, all the way to local governments and national policies, which you already talked, academia, science, everything. But there has to be a much stronger participation, accountability, and accessibility elements to it. So we also see that while we see, sorry, I just want to go back actually. This one, yeah. So the prioritizing most vulnerable people and places and measures, we can measure our success based on lives. But we also know that we see that while there is a declining trend in terms of loss of lives, we also see there's a reverse trend, economic losses, which is also very important, because people are losing their assets, people are losing their livelihoods, and we are seeing it more and more. So that aspect is also important, and we have to understand that how people protect, how they can protect, and how we can reduce the economic losses as well. And the other aspect is, of course, improving risk awareness, information, and communication. That is especially, we are living in an age of such a great connectivity and digital tools and everything, but we still see that awareness about risks is not as at the level as we wish. And also information and communication, we have great challenges there, especially like you will all remember or still happening in COVID, we had to deal with misinformation. We had to deal with people refusing to even listen to each other. So we see that quite a lot now, and our efforts are now establishing networks and really trusted networks for disseminating the correct information, timely information. But information also has to be inclusive, and people has to have equal access to the information, and communication also has to work two ways. It's not just, certain organizations are disseminating information or warning sign, but we have to get better at listening as well. That's a big lesson we learned during the pandemic. And I guess we already talked about, previous panelists also talked about the systemic failures and underlying conditions of risk to reduce long-term vulnerability and exposure. That is at the heart of the, not just response recovery, it's at the heart of the disaster risk reduction and adaptation to climate risk. That's something also humanitarian organization, forcing humanitarian organization and development organizations to come together and work together. I see that it's happening a little bit, but clearly not at the level that we wish. But there shouldn't be any such a distinctive disparities and silos between development agencies and humanitarian agencies. We both should aim at improving the lives and for the sustainability and the long-term recovery. And related to that, of course, protecting nature, nature-based solutions. I'm sure you are all hearing this a lot. This is something we also learned. And a lot of times we find ourselves working against nature, but this is quite changing. And we are, as a humanitarian response network, we are really putting our efforts to understanding our impact of our actions on nature and environment, but also putting a priority to protecting and integrating nature into all of our operations. With that, I want to go back to the anticipation. As I mentioned, the climate-related, weather-related, meteorological-related disasters are increasing. That is, and it is predicted to be increase more. Extreme heat, floods, wildfires, you name it. But that has this anticipation and predictability in it. So that's why we are now working on increasing different mechanism, financial mechanism, this different response mechanism for strengthening anticipation. And I will put some links in the chat later. We have an anticipation hub where you will find more information about everything I talk about anticipation there. But I will just show one example here. So this is, as I mentioned, droughts are a big hazard in Africa, especially. So when you look at the timelines of a typical drought event, so the question is, where do you take your actions? And typically, traditionally, even though a lot of times we have that, it is predicted. We kind of know that it is possible to a certain degree of course, predictability. We know that there could be a drought, but most of the times we wait until it hits people, and people start sometimes migrating, and sometimes, and then we start asking for humanitarian aid, but it's too late. It's too late. It's also a shame that while we know that's happening, might happen, we waited so long. So we kind of changed our system and developed this forecast-based financing and action system, which is right now implemented in quite a lot of countries. I can't give you the exact number, but you can find it in the Anticipation Hub link that I will put. So what we do is, instead of acting after the event, we set up the systems and with all the stakeholders, meteorological institutions, communities, all the relevant or government organizations, also financial institutions, credit card companies, for example, set up the system and identify the triggers. for a certain hazard, whether it's extreme heat, whether it's flood, these triggers and thresholds are based on scientific research done locally. So once you identify those, you set up the system and connect it to early warning system, and then you know that you know the triggers, like when do you send a message, what kind of message you send to communities or other organizations, and you also raise funds. We collect funds in a pool ahead of time. So instead of people get hit, and then a lot of times they don't even have the money to move. They might know that flood is coming, but sometimes they cannot move because they don't have any money. But then we try to reach them after the event. So instead of that, we have this system, trigger system. We distribute funds and start the actions before the event happens. And that model has been implemented in several countries, most recently in Bangladesh, and proved to save not just lives, but reduce the damage to assets, damage to livelihoods as well. So that is what I wanted to bring into this super interesting conversation about this, really based on, again, scientific research and evidence, but acting earlier because we have this information. With that, I'll finish my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.